Hello and welcome to this class on the moon and tides. I'm talking about the tides, but some thinking about the moon. It's so closely tied in as well. Tied in. Okay, so let's start. There's a nice animation of the moon there. So number one, describe how the moon and the sun cause tides on Earth. Number two, understand how the tides are predicted. Number three, how to answer questions on tides and tidal effects. So we'll do a recap on how the moon formed. Talk about the solar system for a little bit before we move on. How the moon came to be, because that's important on the tidal effect on the Earth. Okay, so the tidal effect is a gravitational pull on the Earth. So the rocky inner planets, so Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, were formed nearer the sun. So they're all quite close together when they were first formed, because the heavier elements, like the rock and the metal they're made from, all remain closer to the sun. So the moon was thought to have formed, best evidence we've got, in a collision between the early Earth and another early planet. So it could have been Mars, okay? They could have collided. And it collided into like this, and it threw off lots of debris around the Earth, and that formed the moon, okay? So it's important to know, obviously, the effects of the moon on Earth. It's quite a profound effect on the Earth. Okay, just a bit of on the side, the outer gas planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, are formed in the colder outer solar system. So they're rocky cores, but they have much thicker atmospheres. We'll just talk about the moon. So all the planets form pretty close to the sun, first of all, and that's why they collided, because nowadays they're not that close to each other, so they won't collide. When they first formed, all the planets were very close, and they migrated, so they moved to the positions they are in now. Okay, so let's look at the moon when it first formed. So when it first formed, it was a lot closer to the Earth than it is now. So in the sky, it would have appeared extremely large. Actually, I would like to see that. Actually, go back in time and see that. I think it would be very beautiful. Its gravitational effect was a lot bigger then than it is now. So, and actually the moon is moving away from the Earth about 3 centimeters a year since it first formed. So you can actually predict and measure it moving away. So people actually measure that by the mirrors that the Apollo astronauts left on the moon. And you can actually fire lasers to them, bounce them off, and time how long it takes to come back. And they do that, and they find out the moon's actually moving away from us a little bit every year. It's always been doing it since it first formed. It was actually a thought, it's actually a thought on a bit of a biological note, that possibly early life only formed because of the moon's influence. It caused tides. So tides do have a profound effect on the life on Earth too. So it's another thing that can be explored. And the moon's probably responsible for either keeping life going, okay, or even starting life. And also another thing about the moon, before we move on to tides, is it keeps the Earth's axis. So I made a video, okay, about the seasons. It keeps the Earth's axis at a constant tilt. So it actually has a stabilizing effect on the Earth and stops us having extreme seasons and extreme weather. Other planets, their axes aren't quite as constant as ours. Okay, so the moon's got a very important job, and we'll see a bit more on the tides. So you've probably all seen high and low tide. I mean, this is Blackpool in the UK. I used to live near Southend, okay, in Essex. So there's also an extreme tide. So that's a pier. Okay, you probably think when it's low tide, why is that there? It's a pier. It's because at high tide, you can see obviously that you actually can't reach further out. So I might want to launch a boat off there or something. So that high tide, the sea appears to come in, okay, and actually covers this beach. And you probably usually tell where the tide's going to come up to by how wet the sand is. You always be careful about that. If you see wet sand, be careful. And I'll talk a bit more about predicting tides and being careful a bit later on, because I've really been caught out by high tide. Some tides come in very quickly, depending on your location. Okay, so let's look at the moon. So the moon and the sun are responsible for tides. Okay, so let's look at the phases of the moon, because they can help us to tell us when there's low and high tide. So just a reminder about phases of the moon. So here's the Earth, and this side of the Earth is facing the sun. This is day side of this side of the Earth, and that's night side. Okay, so full moon, you noticed, you may not have done, the full moon can only be seen at night. Okay, because other phases can be seen during the day sometimes. So the full moon is when, the moon's a little bit off axis to the Earth orbit, so it's a little bit above. So so when the sun, the Earth, and the moon are lined up, you have a full moon. And you probably tell that sometimes these line up exactly and you get a lunar eclipse. So you get the Earth's shadow blocking the light from the sun, and it blocks the light of the moon, calling a lunar eclipse. They're quite common. So if you want to look up where one occurs where you live, look up lunar eclipse. You see one a few times a year. I've seen a few of them. They're quite common. Okay, the moon looks like it goes red. Okay, when it gets blocked. So it's the Earth's shadow shining on it. So you've got the full moon. Okay, so it's going this way, this diagram. Okay, so and the moon orbits the Earth about once a month. Okay, so this whole cycle here takes about a month to go around. Obviously, the moon orbits the Earth, so it's the moon going around this time. So you get waning gibbous. Okay, waning gibbous is when it's like just a bit less than full. You see it happening. You get last quarter is where they've lined up at right angles to each other, and sometimes see this during the day. So you can see here that you can see this on the day side. Okay, you see last quarter sometimes in the daytime. Then you get a waning crescent. Everyone's seen a crescent moon, very beautiful. So I like it. It's like I call it a perfect looking moon, and you often see that in the evening. You see it during the sort of daytime sometimes. Then you get line up the sun, the Earth, and so it completely blocks out. You get a new moon, so we can't see the moon when it's like that. When it's here, it's still there, but we can't see it. Okay, and this is the time we can get solar eclipses. So it's when the Earth blocks the light from the sun to the Earth. So these are quite rare. Okay, but they, again, you can look up when they happen in your area. Okay, or they happen somewhere in the world. Okay, it's solar eclipse, and it goes back round again, a waxing crescent. So waxing is when it's getting bigger. Waning is when it's getting smaller. It looks like it's getting smaller to us. You have the first quarter. Okay, when it's getting bigger. Waxing gibbous when it gets big, when it looks like it's getting bigger again, and we're back to a full moon. Okay, so yeah, notice that in the sky. Okay, so we can use to predict things. The word month is based on the moon. Okay, because obviously ancient people, obviously this is a regular cycle, that they noted down the times for the moon. It's irregular. It's a way of keeping time, and that's where our time is based on, the month. So the year is based on the orbit of the Earth around the sun. Okay, so yeah, this is when we can predict, using the phases to predict the tides. So actually the sun and the moon are responsible for the tides, not just the moon that's responsible. So you get the high tides, okay, when they line up. So this is one way of lining up. You get high, actually, if you get a high tide on one side, you get a high tide on the other, because the Earth rotates, remember? Okay, and it causes opposite, and you get low tide here. So the water is pulled gravitationally by the sun and the moon. It says gravitational effects, it's pulling it. Okay, so you get the most extreme tides with the new moon and the full moon. So they're lined up. Okay, so perigee means when the moon is closest to the Earth. Okay, at certain points in the moon's orbit, which is, again, you can predict this, okay, charts and things, when the moon will be closest. So when the perigee, when it's closest, lines up with the new moon or the full moon, when it's in direct alignment, we get the highest tides. They're often called spring tides. It doesn't mean anything to the season. I know it gets confusing. This is why I'm explaining it. Here, a spring tide and extreme tide. It could be dangerous to extreme tide. So we have to know when these things are going to happen. Okay, because obviously people can get cut off in places, and there's a sudden tide, or boats could be run aground, things like that. Okay, very dangerous. There's been cases of people unfortunately been killed with a high tide coming in. So we need to know about these things. Okay, we can use a tide for tidal power. So it's very similar to electrical power, but it relies on flowing water. If you look at here, it's got a tidal barrage. It's actually some of the Thames in the UK. Okay, so the tide goes in and out every day. Okay, and you have a generator inside attached to a coil of wire and a solenoid. Okay, so a barrage is used to separate moving water, so there's a high tide on one side and low on the other. Again, because they're predictable, rivers can have tides as well. Okay, when the tide is high enough on one side, channels the barrage open, allowing water to move through. The flowing water rotates blades of a turbine, which in turn rotate a generator to produce electricity. Okay, this is used in the UK. Again, because if you think about it, it's very regular. We'll see about regular in a minute. Produces no carbon dioxide, so it does not contribute to global warming or climate change. Barrage can double as a bridge to assist local community. People can walk across this. That's happened in London, tidal barrage. They can be very costly to build. Let some people say, are they worth building? Only a few areas. So we need a tide. Okay, because some areas don't have tides. Suitable for this design may impact flow of sewage out to sea. That's obviously a serious concern, health concern. Right, tides are predictable. Okay, so this is on the BBC weather website. So if you're going somewhere to a beach location, I would always predict the tides. It's actually happened to me once in somewhere called Charmouth. Okay, this is the time of Charmouth. It's got very extreme tides. If you look here, this is Charmouth. Sorry, this is Lyme Regis, it's near Charmouth, down the southwest coast. Is that the tides? You notice this is the top. This is midnight, and that's 8 o'clock at night. Okay, so you have a low tide, and then it doesn't take long. 3.7 meters the tide can go up to, so that's dangerous level of water. You don't want to get caught in certain places at high tide. Okay, so it's always good to check if you're going to a beach location the tides, or you can just type it in. Okay, the tides at the location you're going to, and the BBC website or other websites will tell you. Okay, it's always good to know when that high tide is, and not obviously get trapped somewhere, because it only happened to me. I got soaked when I was had to run back when the tide was coming in. Some tides are very, very fast, okay, and they can be dangerous. So we need to check that. Okay, so but they are very regular, so you can make graphs of them, so you can always check. And then people with boats and things need to be careful too. They don't run aground somewhere at low tide. Tide will go out and leave your boat stranded. Okay, somewhere. So look at the tide, up to 4 meters sometimes on another day. You have to check what day you're going to the beach. Okay, so there's some questions now to go over what we've been talking about. So I'll leave these questions up here. The best thing to do would be to copy these down, okay, and then think about answering them. We'll go through them in a moment, but think about how to answer these yourself. Okay, we'll go through. Let's get a bit more detailed than some of the questions I've done before. So tides are a little bit more complicated, aren't they? So briefly describe how the moon was formed. So the moon was formed in the early solar system by another planet colliding with the early Earth. So was the Earth always at the distance from the? So was the Earth always at the distance from the moon? Sorry, I should have put. Let me just make sure. Was the moon? Sorry about that. Good, I've spotted that. Was the moon always at the distance from the Earth, which it is now? No. When the moon first formed, it was closer to the Earth. It is slowly moving away from the Earth. So 3, name 5 phases of the moon. So you could have had a few different ones here. Full, new, crescent, gibbous, first quarter. Could have had last quarter. Could have had other ones there. Okay, I've got new actually there. 4, only the moon is responsible for the tides. Is this true or is this false? So no, the moon and the sun cause the tides together. It's a gravitational pull of the moon and the sun together cause the tides. So what 2 phases of the moon cause the most extreme tides? New and full. So you have to be especially careful, new and full moon, because if that coincides, it's called perigee, where the moon's closest to the Earth in its monthly orbit, you can get what's called a spring tide. So you can get a very dangerous tide. So always check before you go anywhere, the new and full moon. Okay, because they're very predictable, you can look them up. 6, what are the benefits and drawbacks of tidal power? Right, see slides. So we'll go back to that slide. They produce new, this is an advantage of the tick, produce no CO2. Barrage can double as a bridge to assist local community. Drawbacks, very costly to build. Only a few areas suitable for this design. They can't be used everywhere. And they may impact flow of sewage out to sea. Okay. So can tides be predicted or are they random? So we know that by now. Tides are regular and can be predicted. They make tide tables, they're called. Sounds like timetable, tide tables. And they've been predicted for a long time. You can buy books of them to take with you, and book with when they're printed out, take with you on boats or if you're going anywhere, okay? So I'm sure there's lots of apps out there too which help you. So 8, why would we need to understand tides? Give a brief explanation. So safety reasons mainly, okay? So we don't want to get caught somewhere at high tides because you can get cut off. And there was an incident, unfortunate incidents at some point where people have been cut off at high tides and they've drowned, okay? Because look, there was one with 4 meter difference it can be. And also people with boats need to know to avoid running aground. If you've got a boat, you need to know when the tide is to avoid you running aground in your boat and being stranded somewhere. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. And go back and obviously you can use your own time. This is recorded to look at tides and to draw diagrams. I draw the phase of the moon to help you to remember. I always get my class to draw them. And remember when you get the highest tides, and it's the sun and the moon using their gravitational effects to cause tides. So thank you for listening. Hope to see you in a future video. Thank you and goodbye.